Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to be talking about fitting the alternator and the starter motor, and whilst that sounds like that should be an absolute piece of cake, there are a few considerations to think of. We'll go through those in a bit more detail in a minute, but I'm Roy Farr and this is my build of a Gardner Douglas 427 Mark IV. So let's have a look at the alternator. Fairly weighty beast. We've got a couple of bolt holes here. Looks like we've got another one maybe for an accessory mounting or something on the back here, but I don't think that's used. We've only got 2 bolts in the pack here to be fitted, a couple of really long 8mm hex cap nut bolts. So let's have a look at how that fits on. So looking at the right hand side of the engine from the front here, we've got a couple of bolts just hanging off the edge here, a couple of bolt holes, and the alternator, oh that is heavy, that's going to sit there like that, just tucked into that corner up against those 2 there. So let's just get that bolted up. So I just thought I'd show this coming in over the top of the engine as well, because actually if you look in the pack, let's just line this up again there we go. Well, that is to see there, but if you look at where this slots, you can see that the belt pulley on the front there is too far back. So what we've got is a couple of these spacers that will sit in between the block and the alternator itself, just to push it out far enough so that it actually sits in line with that main pulley belt. So let's just pop those on first. So we've got the bolt, spring washer, regular washer, and then we've got this spacer on the back there, which means that the alternator can then slide in here. There we go. Now we should be able to do the rest up with an Allen key. So time to look at the main drive belt on the front of the engine. So this is going to run around the crankshaft pulley at the bottom here, around the alternator, looping back round underneath the inside of the water pump here, over the top of the belt tensioner, and then back round under the crankshaft pulley there. So let's get that fitted. So this is our tensioner, and the part number there at the top, original GM part. So here's the belt tensioner, and that's going to sit on the top there, just bolted through those couple of those holes there. So let's get that fitted. No need for thread lock this time because we've got a spring washer and a flat washer on the 2 bolts that are going to go through this thing. .8mm Allen key again. And just get those done up nice and tight. And just to double check, we can see that's nicely in line with the main crankshaft pulley below in between there. Now the way this works is we get a 15mm socket on the bolt that sits in the middle of the belt tensioner there, and ready to tighten it we just simply pull downwards and it pulls against the spring tension, and that way we can slot the belt over the top and then thread it all the way around. So let's give that a go. So what we're going to do is we're going to slot this just over the back of the belt tensioner there, and just get that sitting on there first because it's going to be easier to pull this through and get the tension with that in place. So let's just get that around there, and that around there, and then what we need is to give ourselves enough tension, or release enough tension, get enough slack, just so we can pull it to the right there of the alternator. I think that's probably going to be the easiest way to do it. There we go, just enough to get onto the alternator. Just make sure that it's in place and we can just release that tension. And there. So it looks like the back of this, this being the water pump, looks like the back of this belt with no grooves in, because you've got the grooves in the pulleys here, is just going to use friction to pull against the outside of the water pump here. So it's just using the back of the belt pressed against this with the tension of the belt tensioner. And that when the crankshaft turns, it will spin the alternator, it'll spin the water pump, and that's all we've got on here at the moment. If I decide to go for air conditioning, I guess there'll be another pump, a compressor that I'd need to fit on here somewhere. I'm not quite sure where that will go yet, but if I need to fit that, then there'll be a different belt. So there's another set of grooves in the accessory part of the crankshaft pulley here, so that could be used to run, for example, a power steering pump. We don't need that with this one because the power steering is electric. But yeah, that aircon compressor could run off of the back side of that belt there with a separate belt for that. Okay, that seemed nice and simple. So another thing to think about when fitting the alternator, depending on your engine and your particular alternator, is just looking for clearance on this part here. This is really close to the block. And again, received wisdom from other builders, thanks Phil and others, is to take a little nibble out of that and just give it a little bit more clearance. So I've just marked it with a pencil, just on the edge there. I'm just going to remove the alternator again, and I'm just going to take a little bit, probably out of the alternator itself. I'd rather not go cutting bits out of the block, and the alternator is that much easier to replace if I mess that up. So let's just sort that out. So looking at this alternator, there actually isn't an awful lot of clearance on here. I mean, I would need to nibble out that little piece there, and looking over the back there, you know, you only want to take a couple of millimeters off, but that's very close to where this bolt is, and I'd need to take a whole section of that out. So I think, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take a little bit out of the block itself. So that's going to be just taking a little nick out of this here. I'm just going to use a drill bit just to get this started, and I'll probably tidy it up with a file afterwards, otherwise it'll take me forever. There we go. So just after a little bit of filing, you can see we've just nibbled out a little corner of the block there, and that's just enough. You can see there's a few millimeters clearance there for the alternator now. So hopefully that shouldn't rattle, touch the block, or make any other noises. On to the next job. Right, so next is the starter motor. So let's have a look at that. Another weighty beast. If we look around this side, we can see the cog in there that's going to connect with the flywheel. So as we can see the flywheel in here, this is going to sit with that facing that way towards that flywheel, keeping it covered that way. And there are a couple of bolt holes there with some long bolts that will come through from the bottom and up into the block in the top there. And we'll need a little bit of thread lock on the bolts that will go through those. So let's sort that out. Go. So that's going to sit in there like that, and that bolt will come all the way through from the bottom all the way up into those threads, but a little bit of thread lock needed. So, okay. Let's just pop an extension bar on there so we can clear the underside of the chassis rail. There we go, good. So one of the challenges with having a chunking great 6.2 litre V8 sitting in a relatively small car like a Cobra is just simply the amount of heat that it generates. Now, I'm going to do as much as I can with the exhaust manifold, or the headers, to wrap those in a lava rock kind of fiberglass tape. That will do everything it can to try and keep the heat in the header and not have it radiate around the engine bay. But the starter motor is actually quite close to the V8 engine itself, right tucked on the corner as you'd expect, and it actually sits inside where one of the banks of the headers comes around the back of. Now, this isn't a massive problem, but there have been reports occasionally of people's starter motors giving up the ghost, perhaps a little bit before the end of their life, and the suspicion is that heat soak and heat damage causes a problem. So, starter motor. Flexible heat shield wrap from Funk Motorsport. So we're going to give that a go. Let's try and wrap this around this. Clearly that's way too big at the moment for that. So we're going to have to do some cutting and a bit of careful thinking about how we do this. Let's take a look. Okay, here's that starter motor. There's the engaging cog there. Now, the challenge with this, of course, is that we've got this enormous great wrap here, and we've only got one piece of Velcro just to wrap that round once. And actually looking at this, there's probably a couple of ways we could do this. We could take this and try to wrap the whole thing over the top, cut this down perhaps sort of down to there-ish and wrap the whole thing over the top. But one problem that will give us is it'll make it quite difficult to get to those connectors. So I think probably what I'll do is cut this in half. I'll have one piece that I'll wrap around the underside, so long as I can get two pieces of the material through that fairly narrow gap between the two units there. I'll have one piece running around the main motor itself, and I'll use the rest, and I'll cut it down shorter and just try and wrap that around some of the smaller component and wrapping of the leads on the top here. So let's have a look at that. So we've got a cable here connecting the two, so I'm going to have to put a slot in here to give this the chance to slide through the gap there. So okay. And I think we'll have to do the same on this side here. We've got quite a column here, and I really want it to wrap all around here and then stop. So I think we'll slice it on the back there as well. So it's going to look a little bit like that. And all we need to do really is trim the end of this just to make sure we can get access to those wires in there, those connectors. Now, with only one piece of Velcro along here, and of course having to cut this one down, this won't actually stick to itself on top, so I'm going to use some of these stainless steel cable ties to hold this all together. So there we go, top section wrapped, some better access to the sockets there. I might actually cut this back a little bit more. A little bit of an overhang there, but actually with the Velcro here, this might be the best way to leave it. All done. So that's it for another video. The next job was going to be fitting the fuel pump and regulator. But over the last few months, I've noticed a very slight oil leak from the differential. And as the fuel pump assembly sits right in front of that, it makes sense to do that first, and certainly before the body comes back and gets fitted to the chassis. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching.